Hello there, and welcome to another edition of Barnsley Focus, the programme which features local people who have something interesting to say about their town and what's going on locally. We also feature some of the people who do voluntary work for community organisations and find out more about the aims and their projects. Now on the programme today, we'll be hearing from lay preacher Fred Thompson about the fall-off of attendances at churches and chapels lately. Fred has long been associated with St Edward's Church in Barnsley, and he'll be talking about some of the things that the church is doing to try to improve attendance. Dave Hodgson has been to a small village of Flockton to investigate the traffic congestion there. Now Flockton is on the main commuter route between Barnsley and Huddersfield, and the traffic piles up on the narrow roads, especially at rush hour. It's not helped by the fact that there is a single lane stretch in the middle of the village. Dave will be telling us about his visit later in the programme. And Emma Kirke will be talking to Kate McNeil, who has a very unusual pet and has written a book about her experiences with it. Kate will be talking about the ups and downs of looking after her pet and where you can get a copy of her book. Now, as I said earlier, attendances at churches has been falling off for quite a few years, and lay preacher Fred Thompson, he came into our studio to talk about the situation, and I began by asking him if he thought that interest was waning in the Christian church, and Fred came up with a surprising fact.
I heard on the radio not all that long ago that the Christian church is the largest church numerically in the world, and there's something like 70,000 people baptised Christians around the world at any one time.
Is that daily?
I think that is daily. Yeah,
wow.
I mean it's remarkable. I mean, as I say, I did hear it on the radio, but again, it's something you don't often hear.
That's something that
but it is
surprised me.
Yeah, and this against the Christian religion is most persecuted religion in the world.
Absolutely.
So you got this paradox and contrast, which is interesting.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, that's a fact I did not know, and it's a brilliant fact to
It might be
know.
It's declining in this country and in probably Western Europe, but we think this. We think this is the pattern around the world, and it isn't.
Well, that is another interesting point. There are no easy answers or solutions, I know that. But do you think the powers that be in high office, for example, are not doing enough to reverse the trend in this country about the declining numbers?
Well,
I mean, even in my own village, there is a chapel, a Methodist chapel, that's about to close simply because people have stopped going. They are very, very few in numbers. And they're having to shut down, which is really sad news.
Yeah. The church is changing all the time. It adapts to different situations. It keeps its central core and belief and so on, doctrine, but it adapts to different situations. And we are living in interesting times.
Absolutely.
And you and I have noticed in our life, that changes in society and in the church. And one of the major changes is the involvement, particularly in Church of England, is the involvement at a local level of lay people. And I'm saying local level, it's probably national as well. And far more the ministry is involving more lay ministry, because people are not coming forward as ordinands as much as they used to be in the past.
And so there's a greater reliance on lay preaching.
Yeah, a greater involvement in lay people, in lay people as ministry. Yeah,
I find that a good thing, actually.
It is a good
because
thing.
you can relate more to the ordinary man and woman in the street, to be
Yes,
honest.
and to be honest, and I think this will impact on the future. And the church won't decline, won't disappear. It'll change.
Yeah, it has to change.
It has to change. It
with
will
the
change.
times.
It'll not disappear. It'll change.
Yeah, right. So you've spent most of your life dedicated to serving others, Fred, in the community, and in particular, mostly in later years around St Edward's Church. I think if you look across Barnsley in general, Fred, there's not that many churches actually closed down. Yes, we've seen the loss of some Methodist chapels and Wesleyan chapels, unfortunately. But the churches of England, and certainly the Roman Catholic churches, they're still there. And they're still operating, and they're still,
Yeah, I mean, there are one or two churches that have been sold off. I can think of one or two. But I think the difference is, again, another difference between the times when we, in the past, in that people, particularly in our grandparents' days, people went to church because they were expected to, and it was part of wherever they worked. You know, the boss went to church, so you expected.
And there weren't the social distractions.
And there weren't the social distractions now. So people who go to church now are really because they want to go.
They want to do it because they have a faith.
And because they have a faith. And the numbers will be less, you know, by the nature of things. But that's it's like pruning a plant, really. You know, you strengthen it by trimming bits off.
It certainly arose, yeah. And that was lay preacher Fred Thompson talking about some of the things that the church is doing to try to improve attendances by the public. Now, a lot of Barnsley people commute each day to Huddersfield and other places in Kirklees using the A637, which goes right through the village of Flockton, and this causes much traffic congestion, as Dave Auction has been finding out.
Now, are you just about ready for retirement? Are you through retirement? Are you thinking about moving to a village somewhere near you if you're sort of in Kirklees or Barnsley or Wakefield? Well, look at the map and you'll find a village called Flockton, and they're building new houses here. Now, think about it. House in the countryside, don't need a car, or, well, maybe you do, because there is a bus. So, well, you could use the bus from here, easy ride to Huddersfield or Barnsley or Wakefield. Well, yes, but you'll have to have lots and lots of time for that, because even at peak times, they're just a little bit scarce on the ground. So, there you are, get yourself a car and come here and live and drive with your car. But the problem is, that's what everybody's been doing for the last 50 odd years when they move into Flockton, and it's getting just a bit competitive for space. Now add to that the fact that you've got the M1, a junction which is really the only obvious one to use if you're leaving it going to Huddersfield, and if you're joining it from Huddersfield, and the result is you have to have traffic lights on a road as narrow as this. So on a road as small as this, it's getting worse and worse by the month. Now, we're here at the quietest time of day. Occasionally, it can be just like this, not a sound. But you wait until it's rush hour, and that's two ways, remember, from Huddersfield and from the M1 motorway and Barnsley. It gets absolutely chocker and you can't move. Some people can wait up to 15 minutes just to get out of the driveway because the traffic never ever stops, and it's bumper to bumper and you can't fit a razor blade in between, and people are not inclined to stop because they're in a hurry to get home. You might think somebody would say, but surely they can do something about it. Well, that's just what we're here for, because we're going to see what can be done. Are you ready? Right. Let's go down to the schoolroom and see the first part of what we've got to tell you about it. Okay, so lads, how long has this been a problem here? Because it isn't just now, is it?
Oh, it's been a problem goes back to the 1930s, I believe. I've done quite a lot of research into it, but it's definitely got worse as the years have gone on. As I say, I've been here over 30 years, and it's appreciably far worse now with the speeds and the amounts of the larger type freight vehicles that are coming through.
I would imagine that the M1 hasn't done it any good, has it?
Well, the problem is that it often gets used as a cut through from the M1 to the M62, especially when there are numerous accidents on those stretches of motorway, because with sat-navs and everything these days, it's so easy to get rerouted by them. You know, when there are hold-ups, it's the first place people look at to cut through.
We're obviously going to show it at its worst in this report, but how bad can it get? For instance, we're getting a queue of cars just coming out of a minor road and they can't get out. How's that affecting you all?
It drives me crazy. So I live pretty much right on the main road. I do have a small road that goes around the back of my house, but just turning out of my driveway out into the main road, it can be 10 minutes, 15 minutes sometimes just to get out into the road. And it's people entering the village, and you know, it's a 20 zone, but people don't do 20. And even one car coming every so often can be enough to stop you from getting out.
Yeah. So, increasing traffic, M1 corridor, it was a bottleneck. It's worse now, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. It's Kirkley. It's been known through by Kirkley's council. They actually see it and called it themselves a buffer zone to break the traffic flow up, which is all well and good further down the line. But it doesn't reduce it at all. It's still not going to. You're still going to have the same number of vehicles coming through, whether it's a buffer zone or not. And all that's happened is at busy times it gets a backlog all the way through the village, and at quieter times people race through it, unfortunately.
Yeah. Because you have got a 20-mile-an-hour zone, haven't you, right in the middle where your two shops are.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, the 20 zone, I don't think I've rarely seen it been respected. And even when I slow down to 20, I have people driving right up behind me or will overtake me. And yeah, we have some parked cars, and that sort of noise as well at night.
That proves your point, doesn't it?
Yeah, and that's the usual going past my house at night. Yeah, racing past, so they race up and down here.
So do you go to work to sleep then?
Yeah, sometimes, yeah. Yeah.
Right. Well, have you come up with any suggestions as to how it could be fixed, or are the council doing everything? Are they taking any notice of what you're saying?
Well, a few years ago, one of the ladies that lived in the village, who she actually became a parish councillor for a while, her and one of the other parish councillors got together following an accident at the top of the village where the road narrows, and went round and got a petition between the villages and got some 800 names on the petition, presented it to Kirkley's council, and Kirkley's council at that point didn't particularly recognise about it being such a problem. So subsequently, after a meeting, it was decided to get a major petition so that could be presented to the full council, and there were over 4,500 people signed that petition. There's only 1,500 residents in Flockton, so that shows the extent of feeling towards it. But that's basically as far as it's got. It's we are pushing ahead with trying to get a bypass for the village, because that's the ultimate answer. The Kirklees are basically, they've run out of ideas with what to do with Flockton. They've no other answer. The 20 zone was basically the last resort.
The last answer. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Is that your feeling, or have you got anything else to add?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a pretty new resident, so I've not felt the pain of all of these. These many years of meetings trying to get something done, but it definitely needs something.
And talking of new residents, all I see when I'm driving here, both at the Huddersfield end and the Barnsley end, is new houses being built. Hundreds of them. What's it going to be like? Can you take a guess?
I think it's pandemonium is all I can suggest. It's
Yeah.
it's crazy. I mean, I see new housing all over the place. I mean, Emily just up the road here. Once that's agreed and goes forward, I mean that initial planning has been approved there, but they're trying to work out the layout and get that approved. But that's another 40 houses, so that'll be some traffic coming down here as well.
So for the moment, it looks like the future is not very bright for Flockton.
No, unfortunately not. You know, it's not that we don't have anything whatsoever against the new residents. There's, as you were saying, there's been probably the best part of 200 new houses built here over the last 20 years, and you like to welcome them. Given the infrastructure to go with it, it's not a problem. Unfortunately, like a lot of places, the infrastructure just gets totally ignored.
Yep, like pavements being cut down completely and disappearing.
Narrow pavements. There's nothing being done with the pavements. It's all that, and unfortunately, the village school that we're opposite now is often at capacity, which means that many of the new residents coming in can't get places at the village school, and they then have to
be bused.
Travel out or bus out, or make their own ways to the nearest school, and that sometimes involves some parents actually walking on the narrow roads up to the nearest village, which is Great Park.
Right, now we're standing by this crossing, who's got at least a checkered history, hasn't it? I mean, for instance, this looks quite new.
This was actually demolished quite recently when a car, I think it was a car that hit it, and as you can see, that the barrier across the road that was put to the school, that's bent. Because again,
somebody's hit it.
And that's right outside the entrance to the school.
What I find just absolutely baffling is it's an ordinary, what we lads used to call a zebra crossing. It isn't. Why not a pedestrian controlled one? So they've got anybody's got some chance of getting across.
Yeah, it makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, highway code says that anybody who sets foot on a zebra crossing, cars have to stop in both directions, but I frequently see before somebody's got off the other end, cars are racing through.
Well, so far, I would like to have said we've got a result, but we haven't. Not even the first bit of it. The bypass remains unbuilt and unplanned. The road cannot be widened any further, but still it runs by the school here. Now, can you imagine 100 and odd school children coming down to this road here? Where are the mothers who usually like to pick them up for safety's sake going to park for it? And what about the motorists who are coming up and down and not realising the danger that both they and the children are in? Something needs to be done. Now, this is in the area of Kirklees Council. 4 times I have attempted to contact the press office at Kirklees Council. Neither of the 4 times have they answered my call. So I would have to say at this point, I cannot even say that they have declined to comment. They haven't. They've just ignored us. Now, make of that what you will.
And that was Dave Auction coming up against communication difficulties in his bid to ease the traffic through Flockton. Let's hope that something is sorted soon and the village gets that badly needed bypass to allow a much more peaceful life for the villagers, where you can cross the road without taking your life into your own hands, and I know I've been up there a few times. Now we come to the final item in today's Barnsley Focus. It's presented by Emma Kirke, who's talking to author Kate McNeil about her unusual pet. So over to you, Emma.
Thanks, Max. I'm Emma Kirke and this is Barnsley Focus. Today I'm joined by the fabulous Kate McNeil and we're going to talk a little bit about her book that she's written and of course the inspiration and true life story behind it. Welcome, Kate.
Hi Emma,
how are
thanks
you?
for having us on the show.
Absolutely great. I mean, I've got a copy. I'm very excited to be putting it as my bath book. But just tell me a little bit about the story behind this.
Okay, so Boxster was my dad's bull at the time, in the early days, and I used to take him to all the agricultural shows. He was unbeaten in the show ring, a real gentle giant. He was so wonderful to show. Boxster actually became allergic to grass, believe it or not. And he
Unfortunate for a bull.
a little bit unfortunate, and his eyes used to water.
Okay.
So in the summer, it was a bit like hay fever.
Yeah.
And he would screw his eyes up tight, and it would swell. His eyes would then swell up. So this went on for a little while, and he then developed what's called an entropion. So the eyelids were rolling in, and he had to have an operation on his eyes, which is when me and him then really made our connection as strong as it was going to get, really.
I mean, people will talk about connections they have with animals, and the kind of commonality would be man's best friend. This is a large, 1 ton bull?
Yeah, he was just over a ton at his biggest. So
how did you? I mean, he's had his eyes done. How did you kind of get that bond? What happened?
So it's all trust. And I've always had bonds with all my animals. You build the trust up like you do with your pet dog. Your dog trusts you. But with a bull, it's a little bit different. He's very strong.
Yes.
If he decided he didn't want to go somewhere or didn't want to do something, then it's very hard to persuade. So from a really young age, Boxster always thought I was stronger than him. So leading him round, if I just pulled the rope, he thought that I had more strength than him. And
So you managed to hypnotise him?
a little bit, yeah. There was a bit of trickery went on in the early days, but it was a mutual respect. You know, I never did anything to him that affected him, or put him in danger or anywhere that was scary to him. And so he just built up the trust with me.
So having got this bond, which is a quite unique and special relationship, something really not pleasant then happened, didn't it? Can you just describe that?
So it was just over 10 years ago. There was a routine TB test on the farm, and it was a disaster waiting to happen, looking back now. Boxster, because of his eyes, he'd had an awful lot of injections over his time, and he'd had an operation, and so he was scared of needles. The 2 technicians that arrived on the day, one was it was her first day on the job, and the other it was her first day back from maternity. So the 3 of them, put in a situation like this, just ended up creating one massive disaster. The blood samples couldn't be taken properly, and policy wasn't followed in getting Boxster sample. My focus at the time was just to get it over and done with and get him back in the pen safe. When the results came back, devastation struck, and he tested positive for TB. It was 0.001 over the benchmark, so it was minute. So I asked for a retest. I just wanted the test to be done properly, just to ensure that he actually had got TB. And if that had been the case, then we'd have had to have let him go. The girls were questioned and denied mixing the samples, and so it was their word against mine, and it snowballed from there, really. They issued Boxster with a slaughter notice. We had to get an injunction to stop them taking him, and he went into isolation. He was in isolation for 18 months in a really small little paddock. He wasn't allowed to see another animal. We weren't allowed to go in with him. And bear in mind, this was a bull that loved a fuss, was used to going to shows. He would have people sitting on his back, and he went from that to nothing, nobody, no contact.
So aside from the fact that you were fighting this, because it wasn't true, he didn't have TB, which was proved later, wasn't it?
It was, yeah.
The trauma for you and for him being separated for that length of time, I mean, how did you get over that?
We just had to take one day at a time. I think if we'd have thought too far ahead where this would have ended up, where the battle would have ended up, we would have been too scared to have taken the task on. I mean, at the end of the day, we were fighting the government, and it's
massive.
Yeah, absolutely huge.
And that's in the book, isn't it, as well? Yeah. So it's not just this tragedy that we're talking about.
No.
There is lots of happy and funny.
Lots of funny.
So can you share a funny story with us about...
So like I say, Boxy was in isolation for 18 months. So during that time, we were doing everything and anything that we could to gather evidence and to gain support. And we went to the Yorkshire Show one year. And we were studying the Grand Parade, and I'd actually got another bull that we were showing, and I was studying the Grand Parade with all these other cattle. My dad was at the side of me, and Prince Charles and Camilla was visiting that day, and they came walking through the middle of the cattle lines in the great big field with all his security guards. And my dad never said a word to me. I didn't know what he was planning. And Prince Charles must have been a good couple of 100 yards away from us. And my dad just set off, stomping towards him. If you can imagine, typical Yorkshire farmer, stomping towards him. And everything sort of happened in slow motion. I just thought these security guards were going to wrestle him to the floor and he was going to get carried off, and how embarrassing that would be for me. He didn't. Prince Charles, my dad put his hand out to Prince Charles and said, "Could I have a word with you, sir, please?" And Prince Charles actually shook his hand, stopped, had a chat with him about Boxster, and said, get in touch with my secretary. Here's his details. Email me everything across, because I'm meeting Caroline Spellman tomorrow, who was the Minister of Agriculture at the time.
So crazy dad's antics.
Crazy dad. And
Absolutely
Camilla came over
worked.
to see me.
Yeah.
Which was a bit of a shock, because I was watching what was going on with my dad, and I was interested in what he was saying and making sure that everything he was saying was right, because my dad does have a tendency to sometimes not remember things quite correct.
Or embellish. We'll say embellish.
Yeah. And so I was kind of half listening to him. And Camilla came over and shook my hand, and I can remember thinking how soft her hand was. But she just said to me, "Oh, and how on earth do you manage to control such a large animal?" And I just said to her, "It's more by luck than anything." And with that, I could see her face kind of like, "Oh," and she moved on. I don't really understand why.
That's a strange reaction.
Yeah.
So obviously lots of stories that you
Yes.
had. What was the turning point then from you to think, these are my personal stories, to I'm going to put this in a book?
I think because it won't spoil the story, we won the court case with Boxster.
Yeah.
But it was the journey afterwards as well. We faced lots of different challenges. Me personally, and Boxster faced his own several challenges again, which we defied the odds time after time, and we did it together. I couldn't have got through what I got through without him. He was my reason. He was my physio. He was. I wouldn't be here now without him, and vice versa. And during lockdown, we've all been in our own isolation, haven't we?
Yes.
And it was 10 years on, and we sort of thought, well, now's the time, I think, to tell the whole story. People knew about the court case. It was all over social media at the time. Well, it wasn't social media at the time. 10 years ago, it was the news.
Yeah.
And so people did know about the court case and things like that, but they don't know what happened afterwards.
Yeah.
And that was an amazing journey. And I learnt so much during that time, that you can conquer anything, really. Just by taking it one day at a time, one step at a time, and with support and love, and you can do amazing things. And so we decided to write it down last year, during lockdown, when we were isolated, just like he'd been, and tell his story, and hopefully bring some joy to people and maybe a little bit of inspiration as well.
I mean, you've written this with somebody else, haven't you?
Yes.
One of the things I know, because we've talked before we were here, about the fact that he read the book to you.
Yeah.
So that you could hear it. I think that's a fascinating part of the process.
It really helped having the ghostwriter, not only because Chris is a much more talented writer than I ever could be, but once he'd written down my story, it was my words, it was my everything that I'd said, Chris put down on paper. But he then came back and sat down in our living room and he read the story to me. And having somebody read it back, you can just listen and concentrate on the story. And if it made me laugh, I knew those funny parts were funny.
Yeah.
If it made me cry, I knew those parts were true.
Yeah.
They were as deep as they needed to be.
Yeah.
There is a couple of points in the book where we did have to stop, and I did have to go and get quite a large whiskey in preparation for that particular chapter. But it proved to me that we had the right tone throughout the book. Every decision in that book was made on a whiskey. You'd actually get a couple of free bottles of grouse because of the amount of times that we mention grouse whiskey in the book.
Okay. So if people want to buy it, where can they find it?
We're in the process of doing a website. The book has only been released at the beginning of October, so if you Google it, there are various places you can get it. But if you want a signed copy, that is the only place you can get it, is from me.
Yep.
I am on the usual social medias, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and I believe that you'll be popping that up on the screen.
Yes. No, not me. The technical geniuses will put that on the screen.
So yeah, any social media platform, people can message me and I can send them a signed book.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much for joining us today.
No,
it's been
thank you very
an absolute
much.
pleasure, and I cannot wait to read it. I've got my tissues prepped. Don't panic. Thank you very much for joining us today. This is Barnsley Focus. I'm Emma Kirke.
And Emma was talking to Kate McNeil about her 1-ton pet bull and her book about her experiences and troubles looking after it. And I can tell you it's a good read. And that brings us to the end of Barnsley Focus for today. I hope that you've found the items interesting and that you'll join me for the next programme when we'll be hearing from more local people from our area. In the meantime, as they say in Barnsley, be seeing ya. Ta-ra for now.